Hey, welcome to Ascend the Hill with Jeremy Austill. I'm Jonathan. This is Pastor Jeremy. How's it going?
It's going really well. I've got a peppermint mocha.
Oh, shoot.
Well, it's like a pour over with some of that, peppermint stuff that you buy.
Like the sauce?
Yes.
Oh, man.
So I try not to drink those a ton. Mm-hmm. And I had the epiphany one day when I, bought one of those in like February, and it doesn't expire until August. So it's probably not good for me. But this time of year I couldn't resist, so I poured in the creamer.
Okay, so it's creamer.
Yeah, it's so probably a lot of chemicals in this. I don't know how much peppermint's actually in there, but I'm drinking it. And
hey, this might be a Wired podcast.
It's delicious.
All the caffeine and coffee. Oh man. No, that's great. I just got water. Don't be confused by the mug.
Oh yeah, this is a total prop. Yep. These that are sitting, most of the time they've got water in them. So.
Oh man, that's funny. Well, speaking of peppermint mocha, we've been talking about the Christmas season over the past couple podcasts, and we've talked about favorite drinks and favorite things of Christmas or traditions. But what is like? Do you have like a favorite gift that you've got, like something that someone's given to you, and you're like, man, it like sticks out in your mind when you're thinking of Christmas gifts?
Man, I don't know. I mean, that's hard to think about. I mean, when you're a kid, all of them just are a blur. I don't really remember any of those from childhood. My parents were very good and generous, but I just don't remember those. I remember a suit that Michelle got me when we were dating in college, a Tommy Hilfiger.
Oh,
really nice, expensive suit that she got me. And that was back in the day. I was in Bible college. I'm training to be a preacher. And back then we wore suits.
Yeah.
I mean, when you got up Sunday, if you was a preacher, you put a suit on. So I had my Tommy Hilfiger suit and it was nice. It was a little, because we didn't know how to tailor stuff back then. It was a little too big. Of course, we all wore our suits and stuff too big in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so that's a very memorable gift. There is I have like a leather cuff. I'm not wearing it now, but that has our kids' birth dates on it that Michelle got me. That's very memorable.
That's fun.
I'm probably sentimental type stuff means more. I have a backpack that I bought myself, if that counts. That's a leather backpack that you'll see me carrying around that I watched for 2 years. I mean, and it's kind of it's kind of expensive, and I just could not pull the trigger buying it. I just struggled, and just Michelle can attest. I don't like to spend money on myself in that way, and so, but 2 years of finally 1 year in December, I bought it, and so. That doesn't really count. That's for me. I bought a gift for myself. But
hey, you've heard it here first, though. Feel free to treat yourself.
Yes. I was. I don't do that well sometimes. So I don't know. Those are some gifts that stick out to me, and so I'm not. I value and appreciate giving gifts and getting gifts. In my love languages, gifts aren't real high.
Yeah,
and so so it's not something that I've just put a ton of thought into, to everybody else's detriment that gets gifts from me. So,
so you're more of like are you more like the moment kind of person? Like you love the moments,
experiences, just sentiment, words. I mean, a gift that is thought out because you know me.
Yeah.
And there's sentiment to it. That means way more to me than, I mean, I feel like this feels very unmasculine to talk about this, but that means more to me than, going and blowing a bunch of money.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think that when we're talking about Christmas, this is a great segue. We're talking about the ultimate gift.
Yes, that's a good one, Jonathan. You got it, buddy.
And specifically this past week, you talked about Mary. And
yes,
if you missed the sermon, go back in the podcast feed. Make sure to listen to it. It's really important because it gives a different background on the story of Jesus from Mary's perspective, and even who Mary was in the context of the society she was in.
Yeah.
And, I think that what was interesting about the sermon is a couple of things, but one of them was you had mentioned, like, you talked about how animated you are on stage.
Yeah.
That's the same way you are at home.
Yes.
And what's funny is, I think it was Sunday night. You were talking about how you reacted to like hurting your toe or anything.
Yes.
If you're watching the video, you can see it. My nose has a little like blemish on it.
Oh, I noticed earlier today in Staff Chapel.
Yep.
Like,
so what happened was I'm cleaning up the kitchen after something, and you know how I have a trash can under my sink.
Yes.
You know how the sinks open?
Yes.
One opens away from you, one opens towards you.
Okay.
And I'm bending over to pick something up, and blindly I'm just reaching out for the handle because I think that,
Oh,
oh,
no.
I'm grabbing the one that's opening away from me. I grab the door that opens towards me, and full force I go
Oh, my.
full into it with my nose, and it was immediate pain. And I didn't yelp because I'm not that, but I am the person that I smacked the counter because I was really upset.
So
but
that's your reaction.
Yep, that's my reaction.
Aggression.
Yeah. Well, yeah, aggression towards inanimate objects. I'm just like, oh gosh, like, yeah. But it was just funny that it happened
right after that message.
Yeah, right after the message.
I am admittedly a reactor.
Yeah.
And the injury report's real. Michelle rolls her eyes. It's like, my gosh, I don't want to hear all this. Interestingly enough, my daughter is like me. She has an injury report all the time.
Yeah.
And whereas my son is like Michelle, he could be maimed and marred and you won't, he won't tell you about it. He won't show you, just whatever. So, yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. Well, it was just funny because I was like, this is like directly what you talked about. And I didn't even mean for it to happen. I don't do that often, but when I do, it tends to be like those silly things.
Well,
you know,
I am injury and accident prone.
Yeah.
So I can be a little clumsy at times.
Well, and even besides all the backgrounds behind the scenes that you gave in the sermon,
Yeah.
I think what was interesting about the sermon was kind of the backdrop of what Mary was going through as she was growing up in that society.
Yeah.
And a question that I was thinking about was, it seemed like if you're talking about the New Testament and the Old Testament, there's a big gap between the end of the New Testament and the prophets.
Right.
And
about
the New
400
Testament.
years. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, in my head, I'm thinking, the Lord was silent, or God was silent, it seems,
Yeah.
for those 400 years. And then all of a sudden he shows up, or he sends an angel to Mary,
Yeah.
to Joseph, to the shepherds, and even to John the Baptist's parents.
Right.
And so I think what I was thinking of is like, why do you think it was 400 years of silence, and then all of a sudden it's this immediate succession of like supernatural events that were happening,
That's a really good question, and I honestly have not spent a lot of time pondering the reason for the 400 years of silence. I'll give a shout out to a young pastor in the area, Pastor Bryce Harper at Family Worship Center in Murfreesboro. I saw a clip from his preaching where he was alluding to that 400 years. And he's probably, if you go back and listen a week or two, he's probably got a really good message on it. I think the 400 years was in some ways symbolic of the waiting in general of Israel.
Yeah.
Like the prophecies have been stated, and now you're waiting. I can't speak authoritatively as to why. And then it is a fascinating point that there is a burst of prophetic, angelic visitation right here in the moment, which I think that was just necessary in order to fulfill prophecy. It was necessary so that Mary knew exactly what was happening.
It wasn't just in her head.
Yeah. That Joseph knew what was happening. I think the angels coming to Mary and Joseph and John the Baptist's parents, Elizabeth, I think they were all to some degree affirmations and confirmations of one another.
Mhm.
And so you didn't have this one encounter in isolation. You had multiple people having these encounters so they could all kind of cross-reference off of each other. Oh, something's happening here. So this person wasn't left alone. And so I almost like the testimony of three or more, the witness of three or more to say, yes, something is taking place here. And so, but I can't imagine what it was like for 400 years without that prophetic utterance that Israel had become so accustomed to.
Yeah.
And there's probably something in it. I mean, John calls Jesus the Word.
Yeah.
And not that the times of prophecy or the prophetic gifting had ceased, but Jesus was going to be the ultimate prophet and the fulfillment of everything the prophet said. And so I don't know. That's all I got, though. That's a really good question.
Yeah.
I would. That makes me want to go explore it a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I think that sometimes, you know, there are those. I don't think it's a comparison per se, but there are moments like that. And I think in like my life or a
Yeah.
Christian walk where it feels like there's that long period of like, Lord, what are you doing? I don't feel like you've been doing much.
Yeah, or saying, and I had a person that I served under through the years, Karen Wheaton, who would always say, if you're not hearing from the Lord, go back to the last thing He told you,
Mm,
and don't run away from that. Like you stay faithful to the last thing that He said, and the Lord is always doing something in that gap. You know,
yeah,
we don't always know what He's doing until you get later down the road and can reevaluate. But yeah, in those stretches, and for Israel, the last word was there's a Messiah coming. That's what the prophets, as you got down to the end of the Old Testament, it was there's a new day coming and it won't be long.
yeah,
There is this messianic hope, and deserts are going to burst forth with streams, and the wilderness is going to spring forth with life, and the lion's going to lay down with the lamb, and all of this stuff is going to happen. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And I guess maybe the silence was because that that's the word I want you to focus on. That's the word I want you to hold on to. You know,
yeah,
that's the word. Like you don't need a new word. That's the word. And so, anyway, and of course, the whole Advent season, I think it lends into our approach to the Advent season, which is an homage, an acceptance and embrace of waiting
yeah,
in general. Like that waiting is a part of the Christian faith, and we for centuries they waited on the Christ, and now for centuries we are waiting on His return.
yeah,
And we're waiting for that day when every tear is wiped away. We're living in the waiting, but it's not just. Which this is a completely different path, but it's not just one day. It's now and not yet. We're
oh
living
yeah,
in what Jesus did. Like He's already doing it. It's already happening. But then there's the not yet, that totality of the thing that He's doing. So
yeah, yeah, and it's interesting too that the path for all of this, you go through those years of silence, and then he comes to Mary,
yes.
which I know it's part of the genealogy of the Lord,
Yeah.
but in some ways you read about it and like, who's Mary? Like,
Right.
this seems kind of random.
Yeah. Well,
Not
it's
random, it was chosen, but you know what I'm saying? As a passive observer, it seems like that, you
well,
know?
and then you get into the providence and sovereignty of God and how He works all things together. And Joseph was of the line of King David,
Hmm.
Mary's betrothed husband, and so she wasn't random. Like she was betrothed, and we probably can surmise she didn't have complete influence over that marital relationship, as in like it wasn't probably 100% her choosing. At the least, her parents had to be on board if it wasn't completely her parents making the decision for her.
Yeah.
Um, but she was positioned by the Lord within this Davidic line, which Jesus was the culmination or the fulfillment of God's promise to David that your seed will remain on the throne forever, right?
Yeah.
And so she was precisely positioned. It
Mhm.
wasn't random, it was the sovereignty of God. Nevertheless, it was her. It's
Yeah.
wild that like God positioned her for that. Um, and that's kind of, you look sometimes at people and you wonder, like, why is it them that
Mhm.
that's in that spot? Why is it them that God is favoring? And I think that's twofold. I think sometimes uh, it was just in God's divine intentions, and He
Yeah.
positioned that person, and He prepared that person. But at the same time, I do believe, based on our obedience to the word, our pursuit of relationship with the Lord, that we position ourselves to,
Yeah.
And so I don't, that's a fascinating, I just love that He chose to do it through a teenage girl,
Yeah.
that He chose to do it through somebody that in society was not at an elevated status,
Yeah.
which speaks to, God's affinity and desire to move through both male and female.
Mm-hmm.
It speaks to God's willingness and desire to not just affiliate with power or strength,
Yeah.
but to associate and partner with those that maybe, quote, don't have as much to offer,
Oh yeah.
you know. And that's just the beauty and goodness of God. It's kind of what we talked about last week. It's a contradiction to the way we think it should go
Yeah.
as humans in our world economy and system. So I think it's just a beautiful story
Yeah.
that's how God picked to
Yeah.
come.
Yeah. And you even mentioned that even just the approach of this story with Mary was a little different than you've done before.
Yes. So I even posted about it when I shared the message on Facebook that I wrestled with this text more than any so far
Mm-hmm.
with my time in preaching. I think this was my ninth sermon that I've preached as your pastors, and so. But I wrestled with this a little more. But I didn't wrestle with the text. I wrestled with myself,
Oh
and
yeah.
here's what I mean by that. And so this is just a little inside, from the preparation standpoint. I I have alluded to Mary's "Be it unto me" many, many times through the years in ministry.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time when I've referenced it, it's been in a setting, maybe a camp setting or a conference setting, where I'm inviting people into an encounter with the Lord, maybe the baptism in the Holy Spirit or just a transformational encounter with the presence of the Lord. And I'm trying to help them understand that they don't have to understand it all.
Mm-hmm.
That a prerequisite for having this encounter or experience with the Lord is not that you've got every theological T crossed and every doctrinal I dotted. That the prerequisite for an experience with the Lord is the same as it was for Mary. Be
Mm.
it unto me. Like, I love that she said it. She was talking in the general sense. Whatever this thing you're talking about, go ahead and let it happen to me. It's
Yeah.
beyond my scope of imagination. It's bigger than I ever thought, but I receive it. I don't know what words to put to it. I'm not sure I can explain it. I know when I go try to explain it, it's going to sound nonsensical. But I want it. If you're doing it, I want it. And so I've always leveraged that statement to lead people into those um, like life defining, calendar marking encounters with God in a
Mm-hmm.
special, unique setting like camp, convention, conference, whatever.
Yeah.
And so when I sat down with the text, I knew I wanted to preach the text because that phrase resonates so much with me. But I started wrestling with myself because my trend when I touched that text, and I think I've preached from that text one other time,
Mm-hmm.
but I did not preach the text the way I did this Sunday.
Yeah.
This is the most in depth I've ever gotten into it from a preaching standpoint. I've always just kind of gleaned the phrase and applied it to the situation.
Yeah.
But when I sat down to start writing the message for our church in this time, and I'm just reading line by line, what it's saying. I I kept wanting in my natural to go over here and communicate what I've always communicated,
Mm-hmm.
but I kept feeling the text pulling me back over in this other area of, um, what do I do when it's not going the way I thought? What do I do? I'm saying yes to the promises of God or yes to the plan of God, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of unknown in front of me. There's difficult days. I just kept feeling the text pull me that way, and so my wrestling was with me. I had to let go of the way that I've leveraged that text in the past to use it well with our people.
Yeah.
And just, again, kind of behind the curtain of preaching, as you hear somebody preaching, um, a lot of times that's the kind of stuff we're working through
Yeah.
and then it's really important to me as I preach week in and week out to try to let the text speak for itself. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to make this dance to
Yeah.
my song. I want to try to dance to its song. And so it was tough for me. And I always want a message to have a real clear, distinct takeaway.
Yeah.
And my takeaway with that phrasing has always been, you can have an encounter with God. It doesn't matter. But I just kept feeling the Lord lean me the other way. That you know, there's some difficult days in the process.
Yeah.
There's some peaks and some valleys.
Hmm.
There's some things that you expect and some stuff that you don't expect. And then, kind of as we brought it home toward the end, that question that all of us have from time to time: how's this going to happen?
Yeah.
Like how is this going to all come together? And all of us probably have looked at our life at certain times and said, I know what I think the Lord wants to do or what He said, but I'm not sure how.
Yeah.
And so just honing in on that nothing is impossible with God. That felt like the sweet spot for this message to hone in on. So
Yeah. And I think that when you said it specifically, not operating by what you see, I think in the one of the
yeah,
services.
yeah.
But my personality is I'm an overthinker.
Okay.
And so when I see a situation, or I think a lot of times it's natural for me to use a circumstance as an indicator of, is the Lord in it or not?
Yes.
And so I think the question that I can have is, how do I guard the dream I really feel like the Lord has put in my heart? And people may have this question too. How do I guard that dream while still wrestling with the question of how can this happen?
Yeah. I think that is the eternal struggle with all of us,
Hmm.
and not being dismissive of it or just kind of trying to push that to the side. That is the struggle
Yeah.
of of factually what I'm seeing, what my eyes are observing, what my ears are hearing, what my circumstances are communicating, um, isn't congruent with what the Lord has told me or what I know is mine in the covenant I have with Jesus.
Hmm.
And so, how do I contend and hold on to what I know to be true when all of the facts are saying something different? And I think the way that you do that is you have to consistently and constantly remind yourself of what the Lord has said.
Hmm.
You have to tell yourself no when you start um, looking at the situation and the circumstances and giving them too much influence over how you're feeling. You have
Yeah.
to tell yourself no, no. It's not that that stuff isn't real. It's real, and you don't stick your head in the sand to say that's not real. That's not real. That's not real. That's not how you handle it.
Yeah.
This is where I am in the process, but I know what you told me. I know what you promised. I know what you're capable of, and so I'm gonna hold on to what you said and let it be an anchor, and I'm gonna live with hope that nothing is impossible, and
Yeah.
everything in between is the story of that you tell
Yeah.
of that's the testimony. That's the testimony. A lot of times isn't God told me or it happened. A lot of times the testimony is like the wilderness you walk through to get there, the
Mm.
pain that you endured, the frustration that you felt, the sense of exasperation from waiting, or suddenly the doubt that just kept knocking at the door. That's the story.
Yeah.
And I think I I th I think it's in that when it doesn't look good, God is going to get you where He wants to get you,
Yeah.
but He's not just after an end result. He's after an end version of you, and so sometimes it's on the way to it happening that
Hmm.
He's also honing and refining you and making you a different person.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but it's a good question. Um, I think all of us know what it's like to feel like this is not what I thought was going to
Yeah.
happen, and unfortunately, a lot of us it becomes crippling. It
Yeah.
becomes demoralizing,
Yeah.
because we're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting. And I guess I would just say the Israelites waited a long time for a Messiah,
Yeah.
and when he came, um, there were people that were open to receive him, and then there were people that rejected him.
Mm.
And I wonder if the people that rejected him were the ones that started diverting their hope in a different direction.
Oh yeah.
Like Jesus was coming, to revolutionize the planet
Mm-hmm.
and society and the world. And the ones that had the hardest time embracing, like that's a way better mission than let's just get Israel out from under the thumb of Rome and get
Mm-hmm.
them, back in a place where they're free. Like that's awesome,
Yeah.
you know, but that's an inferior hope to the thing Jesus came to do. And
Yeah.
so and so don't give up on hoping for the biggest of the big, that
Yeah.
he's promised you.
Yeah. And when, like, I think that also feeds into when you're talking about when she says, "Be it unto me," how can this happen? And you're trying to operate in the realm of faith. You know, part of it is if you're a realist or you operate in that mindset of being a realist, what is that line between I have faith in God, but I am trying to not be a realist right now.
Yeah.
Like, because sometimes faith is not being a realist. Like, you can being a realist would say, well, that's kind of impossible because of this or that or X,
Yeah.
Y, Z. We know that nothing is impossible with God. So how do we operate on our faith knowing that the impossible is possible?
Yeah, I mean, you said it. I don't even know how to speak to it other than that. Like we I think I alluded to it in the message. The whole process of uh, virgin conception,
Yeah.
and then discomfort of pregnancy, pain of childbirth. Well, the discomfort part is an indicator that in God's plan for your life, there are going to be seasons that are uncomfortable.
Hmm.
In God's plan for your life, there are probably going to be moments of pain. Like that's all a piece of it. Not that God inflicts it on you,
Yeah.
but a child will be born. Something beautiful is going to come of all of that. But it's that first part, the fact that he did it through virgin conception, was his way of saying, "Hey, there is a lot of miracle
Hmm.
in what I want to do in your life. There is a lot of like God orchestrating details, moving things around, positioning you, doing stuff that you don't see. And so I think again, I'm a realist.
Yeah.
I don't really believe in denying the reality of the situation. I just believe in holding on ultimately to a higher reality.
Yeah.
Uh, that number one, God's working and He's moving. And I've lived 44 years now, and I've come to the realization that if you live a little longer,
Hmm.
you're able to look back and see how he did it,
Yeah.
and you might not understand what's happening right now, but you'll get a little further down the road and you'll look back and say, oh, now I see where God was working. I see how he was. I mean, even as, Michelle and I becoming the pastors of Cornerstone,
Hmm.
we can look back now and see all the ways God was doing it, and
Yeah.
how he was bringing it together. He was miraculously, sovereignly working in the situation, but a lot of times when you're in the middle of it, you just can't see what he's doing.
Yeah.
Hindsight is a real gift. So
Well, yeah, and I guess that kind of comes to the conclusion of Mary's response, which you mentioned in the sermon of we have to be that kind of person who says, I may not understand it, I may not get all these things, but I have faith, so be it unto me.
yeah,
Kind of that's kind of what we need to be.
yeah. Well, and she said, I'm your bond servant. I'm a servant of the Lord, handmaiden of the Lord. I think is what
Mhm.
the King James says. Um, and in that she was saying, ultimately, I relinquish my rights.
Yeah.
I surrender my wants and my expectations, and I'm clay in your hand. I am a life laid down on the
Yeah.
altar for you to do with me what you want to do with me. And so ultimately I trust that God is good and he does not intend me harm.
Mhm.
That anything that he's doing in my life, there's purpose, there's meaning behind it. And I don't know what Mary imagined
Yeah.
was coming, right? But it seems like she was saying in that moment, it doesn't really matter to me what's coming.
Mm. Yeah.
I am yielding myself completely for you, Lord, to do whatever you want to do in my life. Um, I don't care what the history books do or don't
Mhm.
say about me. I don't care what my peers say or think of me in their evaluation of me.
Yeah.
I'm not really concerned with how quote successful or none of that matters. Like you're intending to do something in my life, Lord, and that's all that I want
Mm.
is that thing.
Yeah.
And that's hard for all of us to kind of shed our wants and wishes and
Yeah.
our preferences and our desired outcomes.
Mhm.
And, Mary's like, I'm having the Son of God.
Yeah.
She did not get. I would be shocked if if she understood that she would be standing at the foot of a Roman cross.
Yeah.
I cannot for the life of me imagine that she envisioned that as
Yeah.
a part of the process. Um, she just said, "Whatever,
Yeah.
I'm in. I'm committed to the task." And and ultimately, I think that's what devotion is.
Mm.
It's a and submission. It's a God. I'm not going to try to set the terms.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try to control what you want to do in and through my life. I'm going to say, whatever it is you want to do, I'm here for it. I'm yielded. I'm committed. I'm going to be faithful.
Yeah.
I'm going to take care of the thing you put in me.
Yeah.
I'm going to take care of the thing that you give me. I'm going to nurture it. Um, but the twists and turns are up to you. And I mean, in this particular instance, the Son of God, the Christ, is born into the earth.
Yeah.
Um, and I would venture to say it's similar for us when we're yielded to the Lord. The end result is the Christ is
Mm.
manifest in the world.
Oh, yeah.
And so um, it comes down to what's more important to me.
Mhm.
You know, it going the way I want it to, so that I have the life that I want to have,
Mm.
or the Christ being manifest in the world because of me.
Mm.
Um, And so it's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard to even think about and talk about it. And I'm not sure I can articulate it as well as I feel it, um, because it's a belief. I said earlier in a greater reality or a higher reality.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's the belief in our eternal reality as
Yeah.
opposed to our temporal reality. When we go back into even better, I'll eventually get into Peter's letter, his two letters, where he talks about heaven
Mhm.
and that expectation. And I might have talked about it before in a podcast, but it's this living with that, like the beyond, my eternal rest being a greater reality
Mhm.
to me than whatever I'm going through and dealing with in the earth. And when heaven becomes a greater reality, when your eternal rest becomes a greater reality to you, then you could say to the Lord, whatever happens,
Yeah.
if I suffer, if it's difficult, if it's painful, this is this is but a short time. My life is but a vapor,
Mhm.
but that is forever. And when I stand before you, I want it on my account to say that person was yielded, that
Mm.
person was willing to submit to whatever came.
Yeah.
So um, anyway, that the story of Mary is a beautiful one because of the submission. And I mean, make no mistake. I cannot. I bet she wept joyous tears when her baby was born.
Yeah.
And she watched him grow. Um, but she also wept tears of pain.
Yeah.
And that was just part of it.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of the next step in the process of this whole story of Christ coming in the world, what do we have coming up this weekend?
So we're going to revisit the Isaiah passage that we talked about the first week. Unto us a child is born, and we're just going to dive into the next portion
Mhm.
where it talks about wonderful Counselor, mighty God, Prince of Peace, and we're gonna hone in on each of those names. We'll probably talk about a few more names.
Yeah.
We might touch on a couple of other passages, prophetic passages in Isaiah. that just talk about what Jesus came to accomplish. And we'll talk, I mentioned it earlier, we'll talk a little about the now and the not yet,
Yeah.
that he's doing a thing now.
Mhm.
And his kingdom is available and present now. Yet we are also like, waiting with anticipation
Mhm.
for the culmination of everything that he said he's going to do. So I'm looking forward to it. I just like talking about Jesus, and so it's another week to talk about Jesus and to talk about the fact that he's wonderful.
Hey.
Hey, if you're going to be there Sunday, you might want to kind of come ready to praise the Lord a little bit and get a little verbal and vocal and clap and all that, because we're gonna celebrate him.
Yeah. Well, if you can't make it, you can always watch online at csnlive.org or listen to it posted the next day on Monday on this podcast platform. But, anyways, that's a wrap for today. Thank you so much, Pastor Jeremy. It was a great day, and we hope to see you next week on Ascend the Hill with Jeremy Austill.